would be crazy. So.
Yes, it would.
Oh crap, it's live.
It's live. Welcome to Lasers, Dragons. Welcome to Lasers, Dragons, and Keyboards. I'm Liberty Spidel.
I'm Josh Hart.
Wait a minute. Lasers, Dragons, and Keyboards? I think I have the wrong podcast. Not even a laugh for that, really?
I'm trying to turn the mute off. Oh my gosh. It's going to be one of those broadcasts, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
We're all laughing on the inside, Aaron. It's fine.
Yes. For those of you who this is your first podcast,
We're sorry.
This is how things go.
It's been like that for 20 minutes since we all got on the phone together.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. All right, go ahead, Aaron.
What, me?
Yeah, you.
I thought somebody else was doing something first. No, wait, we did that. Oh boy. I missed the days of editing this out. On this exciting episode of Lasers, Dragons, and Keyboards, we introduce Liberty number 3. No, wait, that was last episode. She's Lindsay now. We have Lindsay Franklin, and I think we're discussing her book, The Story Peddler?
Yes.
Woo, I got the book right for once.
Good job.
Of course, it doesn't hurt that it has like the most amazing cover by Kirk DuPont.
Oh, yeah. It's really cool, too, but we'll talk more about that in a minute.
Oh, there it is. Josh has it.
Yay!
Yep. Yay. Kirk is amazing. Kirk is my art hero. I just love his work so much.
Yeah, he is the best. So, Lindsay, in case anybody hasn't listened to episode 1 or when we had you on as a guest host, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay, so this is going to be really interesting. I have to tell everybody first off that I didn't sleep very well last night, and it's just after 9 o'clock in my time zone. I've got my coffee. And so this is going to be kind of interesting here, how coherent I am. And I'm not going to ramble off my official bio, but let me tell you who I am. So I'm Lindsay Franklin, and I write fantasy, like The Story Peddler. I also write contemporary YA fiction sometimes, and I also write YA nonfiction. So this is like, I have to do this because this is officially true at this point. I have to say in my bio now that I am a best-selling author, because that is, yay! I feel super weird saying that though, you guys. It's very best-selling author. Okay, whatever that means. But my devotional book, Adored, has been on the CBA YA bestseller list for 6 months now. So
nice.
Yeah, so I have to like add that to my official spiel. But so that's me. I'm also a freelance editor. I am a part-time homeschooling mom of 3 kids who are almost all bigger than I am now. And that's about it. That's me in a nutshell.
It's true. She's tiny.
It's not super hard to like grow taller than I am. My 10-year-old is still shorter than I am, I have to say. 10-year-old daughter not eclipsed me yet, thankfully. But
yeah,
I know. When I took a picture with you last year at Realm Makers, I felt really bad that I was kind of crouching down, and because I was in these like 3-inch heels. And...
No, so what you're supposed to do is just totally own it and take a picture of you. Just a very.
I think whoever was taking the picture couldn't quite get both of us in the frame. If I was, if I stood up straight.
Realm Makers is always such a weird experience for me in that way, because I know most of my Realmy friends online. Everybody's the same height online, you guys. You're all little pictures.
Tiny profile pictures.
Yeah, exactly. You're all short online, right? So Liberty and I stood next to each other for that picture. I was like, oh my gosh, she was towering over me. She was like this gorgeous glamazon, and I'm like this hobbit. It was kind of amazing and startling, but
it doesn't. I mean, it doesn't help matters that I'm 5'8" already, and then I have had on, I think, 3-inch heels. So
yes, had on amazing heels, and I was dressed up as a goth mermaid, and so I was wearing like my Doc Martens and a little bit of like lift on them, but they're not, they're not heels. So yeah, that was really fun.
See, this year you'll just have to wear stilts.
Yeah. That'd be perfect.
Go as Slender Man.
Yes,
you wear stilts with really long pants, and you just walk up to her, ha! Who's short now?
Powering now.
Yes. Yes. And Andrew Winch and John Oddie, those are the ones that everybody feels short of.
Right? Everyone has to wear stilts to be. Oh, and Chris Morris.
Yep.
Yeah. And Chris Morris is one of my good buddies. And so when I'm standing next to him, it's like I can't even see his eyebrows. He's so tall. Like, I just can't.
Well, see, you either need stilts or binoculars this year, though.
Right? And Chris's wife is my height. So I can look Barbara in the eye, like when we're all hanging out together. Like, that's awesome. But Chris is just up in the clouds somewhere. So.
Oh my gosh.
Oh yeah, we have some questions, don't we?
Is that like the fastest rabbit trail ever?
Oh, there's questions.
Awesome myself. So.
Yes.
What's this, a book? We were supposed to talk about that, really?
Oh, right. I forgot.
We never said we had to.
That's true.
That's true.
Our listeners probably expect it.
Good call.
Yeah, that's true.
Oh.
Yeah, somebody right now is sitting at home watching this going, holy crap, they're actually going to talk about a book for once.
It can be done.
Yes.
I don't know. We're not there yet. So.
Okay, go ahead, Aaron.
Oh, I do have the first question.
Yes, you do.
Now I feel bad.
But it feels like we've already covered half of this.
I was going to say, maybe I'll just make something up.
That would work.
Or I can just read the question. What is your name? What is your quest? And what is your favorite amphibian?
Okay, there aren't really a lot to choose from, are there? I mean, that's
there are tons. There's frogs and salamanders and those
geckos,
walking fish,
and skinks.
Skinks. I live in the desert, so I'm like, yeah, we don't have any water here. I don't know what to say about that. Okay, so my name is Sir Lindsay. My quest is to find the Holy Grail, obviously. And my favorite amphibian, I can't even say it. I'm gonna have to go with a frog. I used to collect little frog things actually when I was younger. So I had a frog for years and little frog figurines and stuff. So definitely a frog for me.
Well, in that case, we're gonna. I can't talk today. Can we do this later in the day? Oh wait, this is later in the day for me. So if your favorite amphibian's a frog, I'm going to go out on a limb and guess your favorite Muppet.
Yes, Kermit is. Yeah, I mean, he's kind of my favorite for sure. I love Kermit. I was a huge fan of Sesame Street growing up, so I always loved the crossover Muppets, like the ones who pop up on Sesame Street.
Yes.
Yeah, and Kermit would do that. I don't know if that's still a thing, but back in the 80s.
New segment thing, yeah.
Yeah, in the 80s, like before Elmo was really popular, you would have Kermit and Grover were my favorites on Sesame Street.
Yeah.
Super Grover, yep.
Oh, he's the best. I love him.
Probably my third favorite Muppet is probably Guy Smiley.
Nice.
I am a fan of the Count.
All the kids are going, who?
Yeah, what?
I'm actually kind of going, I don't think I remember that one because it definitely wasn't on Sesame Street when my kids were watching.
See,
that's a sad thing. We're going to send you a couple of YouTube links.
Yeah, I'm trying to get into YouTube to share it with everybody right now, and it's like Weird Al Yankovic 77 cover songs.
Huh.
I'm like, this is not what I need right now.
Okay, when
Hang on a minute. Let's pause for a moment.
Everybody needs Weird Al at all times.
It's my
Let's
son's.
pause for a moment to
It's
listen
my
to I Need a New Duck.
It's my son's favorite artist right now is Weird Al Yankovic, and he's convinced that he's going to meet him on his birthday next month.
Aww.
Oh boy.
I'm like, and the fact that John Audie met Weird Al when he was in Kansas City a month or so ago is like, maybe I shouldn't have mentioned this. Okay, now we're off on some really weird rabbit trails. I'm sorry.
I know. Well, we started talking about Kermit. That's why. Kermit's amazing. Like trails. It's not rabbit trails.
Now I have the Muppet Babies theme song stuck in my head.
I was thinking of the scene from Muppet Treasure Island where Kermit's sword fighting.
So Lindsay,
yes.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about the Story Peddler? I think that's what we're here to talk about.
Yeah, I think so.
Yes.
Are you sure?
So this is really funny. We're doing this interview at a very funny time because Story Peddler released May 1st of this year, so a couple months ago. And I did such an intense kind of like launch blitz with that. I was just having so much fun and doing all of the things. And, you know, it took me 6 years of trying, me and my agent, 6 years of trying to sell a fantasy manuscript. And so there were 6 years of ideas and, you know, like marketing information and just launch advice and that sort of thing that were kicking around in my brain. And so this launch was so intense but also super fun. But I had so many things. And so at this point, I'm like, do I even know what this book is about anymore? Like I just had this crazy like marketing season with it and launching and promotion and all the fun things and Bookstagram and just all the stuff that's out there. So I'm going to do my best, all of that to say. I'm going to do my best telling you what the story's about. So the Story Peddler is about Tanwyn. And she is a young story peddler who has ambitions to become the royal storyteller to the king. And so she runs afoul of the king's guard when forbidden stories start coming out of her hands and accusing the king of treason.
Oh, wow.
She's on the run from the guard, and she discovers that she is not the only rebel weaver. Artists are called weavers in my story world. And she discovers she's not the only rebel weaver in the empire, and the rebels are after her too.
So,
nice.
Yeah.
And you said her first name was Tamrin?
Tanwyn, Tanwen.
Okay, because it sounded like the same name that I named my main character in an upcoming space opera.
Oh, funny. No, I think we're on different pages with that.
Yeah, I think so too.
They're on different planets. They're on different planets. It'll be fun.
Yeah, definitely on different planets. So
different universes. They're cool.
Yeah, because my camera's from Denver, so.
One of the things about names are so funny because I always thought it was Tanwyn.
Oh, interesting. I always am so fascinated to hear how people hear the names or hear the voices of my characters in their heads. And I had to make the decision. I had been writing some version of the Story Peddler on and off for like, I don't even know, like 5 years, something like that, a long time. And I finally, like within the last 6 months, needed to decide how to pronounce Tanwyn's best friend's name. Because half the people would say Brack, because it's B-R-A-C is how you spell his name. Half the people would say Brack, and the other half the people would say Brock. And I would kind of switch back and forth between the two.
Oh, no.
And so people would ask me, how do you pronounce his name? And I'm like, however you want, it's fine. My assistant, who is also one of my my besties, she was like, Lindsay, you have to like pick a pronunciation for his name that's like canon, and people are going to mispronounce it, and that's fine, but you have to pick one. So I think I'm more.
What you do in that case is you make a big to-do about it. Official posts coming tomorrow about how to pronounce this character's name. And then the next day you say, it's pronounced Bob. And then they just wait.
Michael,
what? You can't possibly say that.
See, I think your approach is pretty sound if you're not going to have it turned into an audiobook. But if you have it turned into an audiobook, you really have to pick, and that's hard sometimes.
Yes. And what I've discovered too is that even like readers and reviewers who are reading the book will often, and I don't mean this in a bad way at all, but they'll often misspell the characters' names in their reviews anyhow. So everybody's reading how we read and kind of filling in the blanks. You know what I mean? Like they're not carefully dissecting each letter necessarily anyway. So I know it's probably something that, you know, I need to figure out for when I'm talking about it verbally, but it really isn't that important, like you said, unless you're doing an audiobook and you really need to have one way to pronounce all.
Who is it who said something like the same story doesn't exist in everybody's mind because each of us bring a little bit of ourselves to a story, every story that we read?
Yes.
I forget who said that, but and I'm probably butchering the quote too, but yeah.
I know the quote you're talking about, and it's so true. That's what I'm finding. It's been a really weird experience for me to have my fiction out there, like on a larger platform for the first time, because I've had a lot of short stories traditionally published, but they weren't really widely available to the public. They went along with, most of them were published with a magazine that went along with a Bible study curriculum for youth groups. So a lot of my fiction is like YA contemporary and published there. And so that's not like a huge platform where you're getting a bunch of feedback on your fiction the same way when you publish something to Amazon or, you know, it's out there. You know, my publisher's sending galleys to like industry reviewers and that sort of thing. And we're organizing tours and whatever. This is the first time I'm going through that because I didn't really participate in that for my devotional books either. So it's all been new for me, which is so weird because in some ways I'm kind of an industry veteran, just not in this part. You know, I've been doing other things in publishing for so many years that I feel like, oh yeah, I know what I'm doing. Yeah, I don't know what I'm doing at all, but.
Nice. So it feels like we talked about this when we had you on in our first episode, but what made you write the Story Peddler?
Yes, so the Story Peddler is actually, or the Weaver trilogy, of which the Story Peddler is the first book, is actually the second fantasy series that I've written. I got agented on my first fantasy series, and so that was the one, that and a YA contemporary novel were the ones that we were trying to sell in the early years of my partnership with my agent. So Story Peddler, I was already in the industry and kind of doing my thing, but I'm at Mount Hermon, actually, Christian Writers Conference. I was like, Writers Workshop? No, what's the word? Seriously, guys, I need more coffee. I was sitting in a workshop at Mount Hermon, and there was an acquisitions editor who was giving a talk about I think it was about like behind the scenes of the publishing process or something like that. So she was telling us about her role as an acquisitions editor and what it looks like after she goes home from this conference, what her job actually is, because, you know, there are a lot of newbie writers sitting there. And even if you're not a newbie, you might not necessarily know that information. So it was really interesting. And she was telling us that she really understands how intimidating these conferences are for us, how intimidating pitching is, because she has to do that as part of her job. So she said, you know, she has this little tiny handful of manuscripts that she reads as an acquisitions editor that she loves and wants to acquire. And then she has to take those manuscripts and go and pitch them in the exact same way we pitch our stories as authors. She has to go pitch them to the publishing board. So she's telling us about this, and she made this little throwaway comment where she was like, yeah, I have to peddle your stories. At the end of the day, I'm just a story peddler or something like that. And then she moved on and started talking about something else. But that phrase just stuck with me so hard. It just lodged itself in my brain. I have no idea what she said for the rest of the workshop because I was already thinking and imagining things. And so as soon as the workshop was done, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Mount Hermon at all, but it's up just outside of Santa Cruz in California. And it's in the Redwoods. It's this gorgeous campus. So beautiful. If you ever get a chance to go up there for a family camp or for the writers conference, it's an amazing campus. But anyway, so I found this table tucked away in, you know, with trees all around, and I opened up my laptop and just started writing about what a story peddler would look like if I could sprinkle some fantasy magic on that a little bit. And Canwin came to me at that moment too, and what I wrote very closely resembles the published first chapter of the Story Peddler. So if you read those 10 pages or whatever it is, that's pretty close to what I wrote all those years ago. I think that was in 2012, that conference. Wow. Yeah. So that was where the idea started. And I'm normally a character first writer. So it was weird for me to build a story around an idea instead, a concept. I don't normally do that. And so it was an interesting and unusual process for me, and had some bumps along the way because it's not the way I usually work. But that's where it all started. So
sweet,
awesome.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if we got the full picture of that when we had you on 2.5 years ago.
Probably not, because it's so weird. And you guys all can relate to this. When even if you have published stuff in the past, if you're working on something new, unless you have a following that's already dialed into that story, they might be dialed into you, but not necessarily dialed into the story. It's weird sometimes to go into detail about all this stuff because people care, kind of, but not really. They kind of care about the ins and outs until they are a little more familiar with what you're working on and what it's all about. So I think back in the day, I can't remember what year that was, 2015, when you guys first launched?
Probably.
Tail end of 2015, first part of 2016.
Okay,
January of 2016.
Yep, that sounds right. So, way back then, this story wasn't contracted. It was still, I was still writing it and still revising it and working through it. So I don't even think Enclave had it yet. It wasn't even on submission.
Yeah, it seems like it was about 6 months after we had you on that you got the contract or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That sounds right. We may have been preparing to send it off like right at that time, my last revision on it. I'm pretty sure. That sounds about right. Cool. Memories.
Oh dear, now I need to go find an oldies station.
Oldies, yuck.
I don't mind if I'm in the right mood.
So what was the best part of writing this book for you as the author?
Oh, gosh. See, I really should be prepared to answer each and every one of these questions, but I'm still like staring at them going, oh, I don't know.
We're never prepared, so.
So it's totally fine. The best part of writing this book, so this book has really been with me because I got the idea so many years ago, and the first version that I wrote, I had to do, even though that first chapter, and really a lot of the beginning has stayed the same since 2013, I guess, when I finished the first draft originally. Most of my supporting cast has changed. The entire plot of the book changed because the first version that I wrote just was not doing the idea justice at all. And it wasn't really, I was trying to shoehorn an allegory into there, and it just wasn't what this book wanted to be. This book wanted to be about art and creativity, and not about having an allegory in there, like a religious allegory. So I really had to rethink the entire thing. So I went through a lot with this book and figuring out what I wanted to do with it. So I think that a lot of my growth as a writer, or as a novelist, I should say, happened on this project. I cut my teeth on the first fantasy series that I did, but this was where I grew up as an author, was with Tanwin and on the Story Peddler. So looking back,
you.
Hi.
Yeah, I've got guests. Sorry.
So that was probably one of the hardest parts because of all those growing pains that are involved with that. But looking back, it's one of my favorite parts as well.
All right. So do you have a favorite character? And if so, why?
Oh, this question.
And how do you pronounce their name?
Yeah. I maybe should have had a pronunciation guide. No, because then I would have had to decide on a canon pronunciation for all of them.
Exactly.
So favorite character is really hard. From version 1 to version 2, which the published version is version 2, even though I went through multiple revisions on that version. We'll just call it version 2. I only carried over a handful of characters with me. So Tanwyn, and for those familiar with the story, Tanwyn and Brack and Yeston and Braith and the King, only those characters came over from version 1 to version 2.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
The entire supporting cast that people now, know who I'm talking about if I say Moore or Zell or, Carleth or whoever. They were all new for version 2. So that supporting cast that I really, really love, they're all new. But I have to say those characters who made the cut to come from version 1 to version 2, I really have a special place in my heart for, Brack and Braith and these people. So I don't have a single favorite. I just can't choose between my story creations. It's too hard.
That's fair.
Yeah.
I love the, I don't want to get into spoiler territory. The one in the dark. I love the one in the dark.
Now,
yeah,
those chapters were some of my favorite to write because they were on the more experimental side, I guess. So, and I went through a lot of different, what's the word I want to look for? A lot of revisions isn't even quite the right word, because we just tried probably 10 different ways of writing those scenes. Points of view, different tenses, different levels of detachment of how unraveled that character's mind was at any given point in the story. So it was a lot of fun as, behind the scenes as a technician, it was really fun to work on those chapters. And I'm really happy with what we ended up with. It's very scaled back from where those chapters were originally, but they kind of fed my soul as a writer, because they were just very fun to play with.
Well, and reading them, I mean, they made me cry, and that's a big deal for me. It's so cool.
Yay! Thank you. Yeah, I love that. I'm clapping. You can't see me. My camera's turned off, but I'm clapping.
All right. I think it's Liberty's go.
Is Liberty there?
Liberty might be experiencing technical difficulties.
Perhaps.
I don't think Liberty's there. She wandered off. We're all alone. What's a really crazy question we can substitute since Liberty's not here?
Since Mama stepped away, and now it's time to play.
Yep.
You were supposed to be on that question. I can't think of a really crazy question.
Yeah, I'm back. Sorry.
Oh, you are back. Darn.
That's what happens when I'm out of town at family's house, and everybody's thinking that everybody else is here, and I'm the only one here. So, so are we on number 6? Okay.
We are on 6.
We were about to substitute something crazy.
Oh dear. So, Lindsay, what's something that the readers of The Story Peddler would be surprised to know about you or the book?
Oh gosh. That's a funny question. Okay, so surprised to know about me. I don't know if there's anything, like if you research me enough online, you can probably learn most things about my life story because I've given a number of things, and I don't, there's really not a lot of things that I will not talk about.
Did she just invite somebody to steal her identity?
Okay, so not those kind of details, but just my story. I just did a really in-depth, like 2-part interview, and I don't think the posts are up yet. They will be up soon. But the whole first part of it was about my experience as a teen mom. So that was really, really interesting to kind of dive back into that. And when I'm doing interviews or promotion or anything like that for my devotional books, I kind of get into like my personal life a little bit more. And so I think because I'm not strictly a novelist, I've got these other parts of the things that I write. A lot more of my story is out there than maybe, would be if I were just writing fiction. So I don't know if there's anything that readers of The Story Peddler would be super shocked to know about me personally, if they follow me online at all. But let's see, this book. Well, I already said I completely rewrote the entire plot. I reimagined the whole story, but kept it centered around the same idea. And weirdly, that first chapter and really the first act of the story is strikingly similar. I discovered the original draft the other day on my desktop hard drive. I know. So the one that I completed in 2013. And I started reading it expecting just this completely different story because I revamped everything. And it is a different story, but really only after you get through the first like 12 or 15 chapters. And so that was like startling for me because I've been thinking of it as a different story for the last 5 years. And it is, but the bones have remained the same. So that might surprise people.
Yeah. I had that happen with my last book in the Darby Shaw Chronicles. I have the old version that I wrote as a nano project. And when I was unpacking my things at my new place, I found the print copy of that. And it's like, there's a lot of similarities. There's a lot of differences too, but the bones are still there.
Yes. It's such a weird experience to find, you know, a version of something that is now, you know, a polished, published product. And you find this old draft, you're like, whoa. And what's really weird too, is I could anticipate even the parts that were different. I could anticipate some of the dialogue because my brain is the same. So as I'm reading like a conversation, I was like, oh, this is what I would write next. And sure enough, 5 years ago, that's the response. So that's such a bizarre experience when you don't remember writing something. And this happens when I'm doing my first drafts too, because I'm usually a very fast first drafter. And so I'll go back and not even remember writing some of the scenes that I've written. But I know how I would respond if I were writing it just right now as I, you know, reading it back. And sure enough, my brain is, you know, kind of consistent in that way. So that's a very bizarre, kind of surreal experience.
Yeah.
All right, next question. Did you feel this book had to be written in this particular setting? And if so, why? And how would a setting change have changed the book?
I think because I'm writing fantasy with The Story Peddler. I mean, I could have made it urban fantasy now that I'm thinking about it. It really, this story hinges on that fantastical element. Again, kind of unusual for me. My other stories, you could really pick up the plot and the characters and drop them in, you know, a historical setting or a contemporary setting or something different, and still probably write most of that story in a different setting. This one feels like it needed to be a high fantasy story because it's so, the magic of it is so central to the plot and everything else. So I really feel like this one had to be what it is.
Nice.
Nice.
You know what?
So, what?
Somebody in a review the other day said, called it a dystopia, and not like a post-apocalyptic kind of thing, obviously, but that fascinated me because he's right. Like, there are some dystopian elements to it, and I had never ever thought of it in that way. So that's really fascinating. Sometimes you need someone else's opinion, and he made a comment like, you know, this book snuck a dystopian onto his list for this year or something like that. I was like, oh, you know, he's not wrong. He's one of my NetGalley reviewers. So that was kind of cool.
I've had that happen before too. It kind of throws you when somebody labels something to your book that you didn't really see.
Right.
It's like, wait a second, I didn't go in and try to do it that way.
Right. I've had a couple experiences like that with The Story Peddler, and this was the first time anyone used the word dystopia, but he's not wrong because the arts are very suppressed, the government is very oppressive, and so, you know, and that's very central to the plot. It's not really just the background. That's why Tanwin gets in trouble. So, you know, he wasn't wrong. I just went, oh,
that label.
Yeah. So that was kind of cool.
Well, at least when, for marketing purposes, you can throw it in the dystopian category.
I could.
Yeah.
There you go.
You might actually get a new type of reader.
A new way.
Yeah.
So what's an interesting thing you had to Google or research in the course of writing The Story Peddler?
Oh gosh. Okay, and this is probably the exact same one I shared last time, so my apologies to your listeners, but it's really probably the strangest thing. Now, I've been writing the sequel. I wrote the sequel during April of this year, pretty much the entire thing during April. So right before Story Peddler was launching, because book 2 was due on launch day. So that was super fun. And I Googled.
Okay, that's not good planning, I wouldn't think.
Well, the planning was really my failure here, because I've had a year to work on that book. But I'm still trying to find balance. It's really weird when you build up your career with other things around, surrounding publishing. You guys all know there are a million different things you can get involved in that are within the publishing realm, but aren't publishing or writing themselves. Okay. So for me, that was my freelance editing career. And so it's been really weird for me to go from building that business and being an entrepreneur in that way and working on my clients' manuscripts and doing that for like how many years? 2.5, 3 years, something like that. And then all of a sudden, within the space of about 6 weeks, I went from having no books under contract to having 5 books under contract, because I had, I had 2 devotional books and the 3 Weaver trilogy books. So that has been, I'm still, and that was in like what, fall of 2016. And I'm still trying to figure out how to like fulfill my obligations as a freelance editor and not let that business totally die, because I don't want it to die.
Right.
Also get these books written. So I really had, I need to like not make my publisher sound like a nightmare, because I didn't have 1 month to write the book. In theory, it's just been so, I've been, doing all these other things, doing some stuff for my other publisher, doing freelance stuff. So it's really my fault that I ended up with 1 month to write the book. They gave me a year. So I just have to throw that out there. So I did, sorry, we rabbit trailed. Let me come back around here.
It's okay.
So I've done a lot of really crazy research for book 2, because like an idiot, I put book 2 on a ship. So the majority of that book takes place on a ship, and I don't know anything about sailing. And so I've done a lot of research for that book. But for Story Peddler, there wasn't as much. Also with the sequel, I was building, let's see, how many, I think 4 new cultures from scratch.
Oh, wow.
That one. And Story Peddler takes place in this very like localized kind of area, this one part of the Empire of Tyr. And so it just didn't require the same level of research and looking for visual inspiration and all the things that I do when I'm world building. So anyway, the weirdest thing I had to look up for the Story Peddler was I had somebody in like a critique group at a writer's conference read my first 20 pages or whatever. And he said, I don't think that you can have this grain farming community by the sea, because Tanwin lives on a peninsula and she comes from this small town like farming community and they're growing grain. And he's like, I don't think you can have that by saltwater. And he said, I might be wrong about that, but that stuck out to me. It pulled me out of the story a little bit. So then I had to go home and do all this research about if you can truly grow grain by the sea, which you can, but there are some considerations for it. And so I spent probably half a day or maybe even a whole day worth of writing time digging into that and figuring that out. And only adding, there are just a few of the tiniest details that are in like the first, I don't know, somewhere in the first 25 or 30 pages of the story, where one of my farmer characters is just talking about salt burn, and he's talking about the flooding that comes in and what it does to their crops. And he just mentions it in passing on this whole long list of grievances that he has about but it just adds that little bit of realism to where people who maybe are familiar with farming techniques, or like this guy where he wasn't totally sure, but it kind of pulled him out because it felt like I didn't know what I was talking about. And he's not wrong, because I'm not a farmer. Like, I don't know what I'm talking about unless I research it. So that's probably the weirdest thing that I had to look up for this book. and figure out. But I love that stuff. I'm such a research nerd. It makes me happy. So
that's really fascinating.
yeah.
So I'm going to throw you a curveball.
Oh, good.
The Weaver trilogy what I've seen of the Weaver trilogy so far has this really unique and cool magic system. Like, where did that come from? Like, why did you decide on you make sculptures when you tell a story or whatnot?
Okay, that is a really great question, and I wish I had a better answer to that, because it's only been in the last couple of months as I'm promoting this story that I've really even thought about where it came from. Because as I was sitting down in the redwoods and just trying to write about this concept and this phrase that stuck with me, it's just what came to me in my imagination when I thought, what would that look like if we could kind of add magic to it? Someone who sells stories. Well, she'd have to have something physical to sell. And, so it kind of stemmed from there. But in digging into the psychology behind that, for me personally, I think growing up with a dad who's an illustrator probably really had something to do with how I visualized that. Because in my household growing up, like, that was one of my favorite things to do, was to go stand at my dad's drafting table while he was sketching things. And my dad is super, super talented. He was a graphic designer for most of his career, but he's a very talented illustrator. And so if he had gone a different direction with his career path, he easily could have worked at Disney or, Pixar or something like that, doing animation, that sort of thing. So that was my favorite thing to do, was just to watch him draw things. And, when you're dealing with somebody who has that kind of brain, that artist brain, he visualizes stuff in like realistic 3D terms before it's anything on the page. And so that was magical to me, to watch these little pencil sketches that he would start with, and it looked like chaos for so long. And then suddenly he would just add a few lines or some shading here or there. And it was this beautiful 3-dimensional thing, or this adorable cartoony thing, or whatever he was drawing. And that, as a child, was very magical to me. And so I think that was heavily influential in the way that my brain just processed the idea of somebody who sells stories, where there's magic involved or something like that. And my dad's not the only one. My whole family's very artistic, very musical, performers, lots of performers in my family. So I'm kind of like the artistic dud in my family. I mean, I played music. I mean, I played the clarinet when I was a kid, and I was a dancer as well. My mom was a ballerina. So, art was always, and the arts were always part of my life, but my true talent is more for writing and storytelling, and it's not as visual or auditory as the other kinds of art that my family does. So I always kind of felt like I was the dud, because I have professional musicians, professional choir directors in my family, professional artists. My dad's not the only one. My nephew, my sister's son, was totally born with his grandpa's gift for art. He was drawing 3D stuff from like an aerial perspective, like dinosaurs and stuff, when he was like 4. So,
wow.
Yeah, so very artistically talented family. And I think when I reimagined the Story Peddler and thought about creativity and art and realized that's what the story wanted to be about, my family and my background really heavily influenced my ideas there with the magic and how it all worked. So
cool.
Yeah.
So it's time for a random geeky question, Aaron.
Ooh. And the question is, what is your favorite quote?
9-4.
I'm trying to read that right now.
Okay.
What is happening?
Are we ready yet? That is your question, apparently.
Okay, perfect. It's very existential, philosophical.
What is your favorite quote from Spec Fig?
Oh my gosh. That is so hard. That's one of the okay. Stop.
Or you can pick a random one. That works too.
this is impossible. There's so many. I grew up and if I'd really thought about it, I would have researched, because I'm a research nerd. I would have, pulled up maybe a great quote that I loved from one of the Oz books as a kid or something, because I grew up with those. Unlike a lot of authors of faith, I did not grow up reading Narnia. I read those as an adult. I grew up with Oz. That was my thing when I was a kid. So, gosh, I probably would have pulled something from there. But one of my very favorite lines that I can quote off the top of my head is the opening line of Voyage of the Dawn Treader. So when I'm teaching about first lines, or just when I'm teaching fiction, I did that for several years in my homeschool co-op. I taught teen writers, and that was just such a blast. They're so fun. And so when I was teaching them about, hooking readers with your first line, I would always use this as one of my examples, because I just think it's so brilliant. Let me see if I can quote it from memory. Do you guys know this one? There once was a boy named Eustace Clarence Scrubb, and he almost deserved it.
Oh.
Yeah.
Now, I love that line so much, and it's from a spec book, of course. It's not even a real specky line, but I love that line so much, because I always would tell my students that first line, and then the first page, and then the first chapter, it's all like you're entering into a contract with your reader, and you're letting them know what to expect. Tone wise, and just in all these different ways, you are letting them know what type of book this is going to be. And that line is so brilliant to me, because it's so C.S. Lewis, and it's so like his sense of humor. And so that there's that element of humor, and the cover of Dawn Treader should probably tell you it's a fantasy and there's going to be adventure and all these other things. But that first line really is the perfect contract with the reader of that book, letting you know this is who you're going to be hanging out with for the next however many hundreds of pages. So I think it's just brilliant.
Cool. That is pretty awesome.
Yeah, and I don't think we've had that answer, but yeah, it's a good one.
Oh, good. I like to be different.
So now we're going to ask one of the more impossible questions to answer, even worse than the one we just asked. What authors would you recommend?
Oh man! All right, so
just list our names and it'll be fine.
Aaron and Josh, and Liberty, obviously. So this is kind of weird. Now I have to make a confession here, and I kind of did a little bit, but I have this very strange gap in my my reading knowledge, if that makes sense. So I went from reading children's fantasy when I was a kid. And then when I entered adolescence, I started reading literary fiction and the classics. So I, as an adult and a fantasy author, have been trying to backtrack and fill in my knowledge and my history of reading more adult fantasy and things beyond kind of Oz and Narnia and that sort of age group. And so I'm always embarrassed when people ask, "Oh, you're a fantasy author. Who's your favorite, fantasy writer?" And I have all these answers, where they're children's authors, but that's that's where I'm coming from. And I can give you outside of genre, out of genre answers. I could tell you I love Jane Austen, because I do. And I love Steinbeck, and gosh, I love Poe, of course, the former god of Poe. So, I have a lot of classic authors like that I love, but grew up with the Oz series. So, and those are super weird. Like if you want to go through a trippy journey through someone's crazy imagination, highly recommend the Oz books that L. Frank Baum wrote himself, because there were some after he passed or after he moved on from the series or whatever. But I think
the first one is fairly close to the movie, and it just gets weird from there.
Yeah, being from Kansas, I read a few of them. They were on the shelf in my public library growing up, and they're different.
They're very strange. Yes. So if my imagination's a little off center, maybe that influenced me heavily growing up. But I loved those books so much. They were so strange and creative. And let's see. Lynn Reed Banks. I read a lot of her stuff growing up. She's the Indian in the Cupboard lady.
Oh, yeah, those are good. Yeah.
Yes, really good books. And my favorite of hers, which I haven't read probably since I was 12 or 13 years old, so I don't know how it would stand up for me now, but my favorite book as a kid was The Farthest Away Mountain, and she wrote that. And so not one of her more famous ones, I don't think, and I don't even remember how I discovered it, but I still have my copy of that one. I'll have to read it at some point because I keep mentioning it because it was my favorite book growing up. I'll have to see how it stands up as an adult, but I read outside of genre a lot too. I'm not sure why that is. It's not something I do intentionally. Just when I'm writing fantasy, I find that it edifies me for some reason to be reading thrillers or to be reading, you know, something different that isn't spec fic even. I do like sci-fi as well, but.
All right.
Yeah, I find it, for me, I can't usually read a lot in my genre that I'm writing when I'm writing it, just because the tone and the storylines will start kind of weaving their way into what I'm writing, and I don't really like that too much. I don't want to be a copycat. So
exactly, it's like it starts to seep in even when you're trying to prevent that. It's really hard. It's hard to not, because our brains are complex and they absorb things in that way. So yeah, I agree.
I can always tell when I'm reading Jane Austen while I'm writing urban fantasy, because then I start getting flowery language.
Oh, I love Jane so much. Her language can be kind of crunchy and difficult to get through sometimes because it is so flowery and so outside, you know, our modern way we speak in a modern way. But she is so snarky. I love her sense of humor, and you really have to like chip away that flowery language to get to the snark, because it's not our usual way of speaking. So you can read her books and totally miss it, I think. But she's hilarious. She would be great on Twitter. You know,
yes.
Oh man.
So I wonder if I'm sure somebody by now has set up as a fake Jane Austen account on Twitter. And I'm sure it's so snarky and nobody gets it because it's, you know, just over everybody's head.
And everybody thinks of her as so romantic, and she is. And yet she was also a very scathing critic of, you know, the social group that she was part of. And so I just love her. She's a lot deeper, I think, than people really realize.
Yeah, I think most of her books were written as scathing commentaries rather than as, you know, lighthearted romances.
Yes, exactly.
And nobody understands it because we don't know what it was like back then. And
exactly. And we don't speak in the way that she speaks. And so it sounds like she's doing this very like romantic, beautiful thing. And in some ways she is, because of course she does have great romances in her, you know, plots. But yeah, totally. I love her.
And we have bored the guy.
No, I'm sorry, boys. Erin's like getting up and leaving. Where are you going, Erin? We're going to talk about Jane some more. No.
I am looking, and there actually are a couple of Jane Austen accounts on Twitter. There are people who happen to be named that, or if there are fake Jane Austen accounts. I'm not entirely sure yet, but they are there.
Start one.
Nice. So, well, we're going to move into the writing half of our show. So, Lindsay, are you a plotter or a pantser?
Oh, gosh. And see, last time I was on, I had a very definitive answer to this question. And I did. I was like, plotter all the way, 100%, nothing else ever. And it's so weird. Like, I think that's part of my journey with the Weaver trilogy is my own creative brain laughing at me and telling me, haha, you know, you think you have this figured out. No, you don't. I had the hardest time. The second book in the series is called, it has a new name. If you have the first edition print version of the Story Peddler, the name in the back says the Story Mage, but that's not the name anymore. The new name is the Story Raider. And when I sat down to write the Story Raider, I had my outline and I screamed and gnashed my teeth through that outline in the first place, just getting it done a year ago. But I had my outline. I was like, cool, I'm ready to go. And I normally will write, if I have a really solid outline, write from scene 1 to the end. That's why I do outlines, because my brain doesn't really work in that way. My brain is nonlinear, and so scenes don't come to me in chronological order. I can't, like, I have to figure out where I'm going ultimately, and then figure out how to get from A to Z and that sort of thing. So outlining and plotting really helps me clarify that in my head and make sure my story doesn't wander around too much before getting to point Z. You can maybe tell by talking to me that I wander around a lot mentally. So
I haven't noticed.
Yes, we all hop down the bunny trails and things. So that's why I'm so in love with plotting, is because it really helps me wrangle my own brain. But when I sat down to write the story better, so I thought I had come up with this system of being a very intense outliner that really helped me deal with that. But I got, I think, maybe 30% of the way through the story chronologically, just writing from, scene 1, scene 2, 3, 4, blah, blah, blah. And I got so stuck. And I only had a month to write this book, you guys. Like, I couldn't afford to be stuck. So I was like, what am I going to do now? I just couldn't seem to get past this one scene. I couldn't, get inspired to write the next. And I'm freaking out because my deadline's approaching, launch day is approaching. It was just awful. And so one of my friends suggested, well, maybe you should try writing things out of order. And I just, rent my robes and put, ashes on my head and said, no, because my brain wants to write out of order. But I was like, I'm never going to, get to the end if I start doing that. But what I did was I took, I have 3 points of view in this book, just like Story Peddler. And I took the minor points of view. I stopped writing the main storyline, took the minor points of view, wrote those in chronological order. So from point A to point Z, in those characters' heads, finished both of those. And then I went and wrote the last act of the story. And then that got me unstuck enough that I could go and start at that 30% mark and write the rest of the way through until I reached the 75%, where I had already written the end. So there are things that you have to fix in revisions when you do that, because if you don't know what's happening at the 60% mark, something you say at 80% is probably going to be wrong, which is fine. But so I would say I kind of pantsed my way through my plot with this last one. So because as I was doing all of this stuff, I added things, I took things out, I kind of reworked as I went and realized what wasn't working, why I got stuck at 30%. So I'm just going to say now that I'm a planter. I'm not going to make such strong declarations anymore, because as soon as I start saying, oh, this is my process, the next book is going to throw me for yet another loop. So done making, declarations.
Yeah, I've found that each book so far is just totally different. And
right?
I don't know why that is, but it seems like, shouldn't you find a process that works every single time? But apparently not.
Right? Why doesn't it work that way? I really want it to. I really want to be this black and white person that this is the way that works for me. The end. Moving on for the rest of my life. That's the way that works for me. And it just is thing.
And that doesn't work.
Yes, doesn't work.
So.
But I mean, at the same time, when you reach the end of a book and you're moving on to the next one, the book is different and you're a different person because you've created this book and you've had different life experiences. So I guess maybe we should just chalk it up to that.
Yes, exactly. And I think, as you grow as an author too, and every, no matter how professional you are at this or how long you've been doing this, I feel like my goal will always be to grow with each book. Like, I want each book to be better than the last.
Right.
Which kind of like a scary thing if you're a perfectionist. It's scary to think that your last book, wasn't as good as it could have been, but that's the nature of it. We grow and we change and we evolve, and hopefully we're evolving in the direction of getting better rather than the other way. We wouldn't want that. That would be worse.
Yep. Aaron.
Oh, it is my question. Everybody's so busy talking, arbitrarily. So we've kind of covered a little bit, but what does your writing process look like?
Panicked mostly. I know, it's really funny because I actually teach workshops on time management and stuff of that nature. And it's because I have these very clear systems that if you put them into practice, they do work. Like to manage your time, to squeeze in, you know, or to maximize whatever free time you do have. And yet I have a really hard time putting these things into practice consistently in my own life. So I do tend to procrastinate. I do things like this. And so my writing process is probably more panicked than it should be most of the time. But oh gosh. So I've told you a little bit about my my outlining process. I do a lot of pre-writing. And when I pre-write, I like to write things out by hand. I use a lot of colored pens and that sort of thing. I don't know why. It helps me organize stuff. There's a lot of chaos happening in my brain at any given time. And so if I want to, which is great because there's a lot of creative things happening in there, but if I ever want to make those things translate for anybody besides me, I have to organize them. That has to be a thing. You know, it needs to come out in a way or be processed in a way that works for other people besides just me. So I do a lot of pre-writing before I even write one word of the actual manuscript. Also outlining. I'm still a big fan of that. I think I will always outline, even if I'm giving myself more and more freedom to kind of not write everything chronologically or to not write all one point of view or what am I trying to say? To alternate the point of views the way they are in my outline, you know, like I did with StoryRaider. I think I will always make outlines because I will wander around in the forest of my story for, you know, thousands of words and never arrive at my destination if I don't do that. So that will always be part of my process too.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah. I used to use index cards for my outlines so that, and I think this is maybe a James Scott Bell thing. I'm sure a lot of writers do this, but I think that's where I heard about it was, you know, having like an index card for each scene. And of course in Scrivener, you can do that very easily on the corkboard and that sort of thing.
Right.
But back in the day, like 2011 or whatever, before I had Scrivener, these were literal physical index cards that I then taped up on my wall in my bedroom. And so my poor husband would live with like an entire novel's taped up next to our bed or whatever. And I'm a very visual person. So I like to see the whole thing at once. You know, I will take a whole manuscript that's printed out and spread it out on my floor. Like I'm a visual person. So Dave, my husband, is very gracious. Parts of my process.
So as you're on chaos, how long does it take to knock out a draft in the midst of all that?
So I'm a
month, apparently.
Yeah, a month. I'm a pretty fast drafter. I have to say, if I can get going and not get stuck on anything, then I mean, I can do 5,000 to 10,000 words in a day.
Oh wow!
Yeah. So, which I'm thinking StoryRaider is right now right around 100,000 words. I was trying to make it 90 because I do tend to overwrite. Again, you might be able to tell by talking to me that I'm an overwriter. And so, you know, Steve Lobby is my editor for these books. And so he'll, you know, just kind of work his way through the first draft with his red pen, just cutting things out. Don't need this, Lindsay. This is too wordy. Da, 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 you know. So I was trying to turn it into him at 90,000 words, but I didn't make it. So we'll see what it is after my first revision. It's still with Steve, so I have no idea how I did. But so yeah, 100,000 words. And I think going into April, I had 17,000 written. So I did all of the rest of those words in 4 or 5 weeks, from 17 to 100. So 83,000 words, I guess that is, in 5 weeks.
Wow.
Yes. So I'm fairly fast. I don't know how good this draft is. As I said, it's still with my editor. We'll see how much it requires. But once I get going and get into a groove, I can make things happen. With Adored, that book I wrote, and that's my first devotional book. Let's see, we conceptualized, drafted, revised, I'm not sure if we proofread it in that time frame or not, but we did pretty much from the ground floor to like completed, mostly polished manuscript in about 4 months. And that was really having nothing going in except technical specs. So Zondervan came to me and said that they wanted, 365 devotionals. The final word count would be somewhere around 75,000 words. Each Devo could only be a maximum of 200 words. The verse is a maximum of 100. So they had all these technical specs for me. And I said, cool, what's the book about? And they said, Adored. Like they just had the title. And then I had all this freedom I know. And I thought, oh my gosh, okay. So the overall theme of it is how deeply adored and loved we are by God. I'm like, that's a great theme. I love that. I could sit down and probably write 60 different unique devos about just that, but I had to write 365 of them. So I was like, structure this and start researching and just all of the things. So I did all of that conceptualizing, researching, writing, and revising with my editor in about 4 months. So yeah, wow. I can work fast when I need to.
Nice.
And I usually need to.
I totally understand you on that one. Aaron.
Me again? Okay.
I think so. Oh, wait.
Well, we skipped a couple and didn't change any coloring here, and things are being edited on the fly, and I'm very confused.
We're professionals.
Really?
Yeah.
All right,
okay.
We'll go with this.
Or we can go to 6. I don't know.
Yeah, let's just jump to 6.
Let's go to 6. Let's go to 6.
Okay, fine.
Kind of covered some of that in various rabbit trails. So.
As an editor yourself, how do you handle the editing process before you submit to your editor at Enclave?
Ooh, that is an interesting question. What I just did with StoryVader is not my preference. I'm not going to lie. And I think I sent that manuscript off with an apology where I was like, Steve, this is a literal first draft. There are parts of that manuscript that I haven't even read back yet. Like, it's so embarrassing. I just hope, anyway, I hope it's not a total disaster. But my preference would be to finish the book, have a month to just let it sit, because I can't go back and really see it with an editor's eyes for probably at least a month, which is why I didn't even really bother before sending this off. I did go through certain things, like once I got a draft complete, I knew that there were continuity errors and things I needed to change, the whole timeline I needed to change. You guys, I had to research how fast a ship of, a certain historical era could travel in any given time to work out my timeline, because these are the things that no one notices when you get them right. They just kind of are seamless and the story just flows. But if you get these things wrong, if you have them like sailing thousands of miles in 2 days, somebody or lots of somebody's are going to notice. So
wait a minute.
Yeah, exactly.
This is why I write sci-fi, where you can just use hand waving to get the ship there when it needs to be.
Well, see, everyone says that about fantasy. Oh, you can just make it up. No, you really can't. There are some things you can just make up, but not this kind of thing.
Right.
You could magically transport the ship somehow.
Yeah.
That'd work.
I will say I do use magic wind at some point when they are becalmed, but that's a very intentional choice in that moment of the story. So anyway, again, with the rabbit trails, what was I talking about? Oh, editing. Right. So there were certain things like that I knew I needed to go back and adjust. Because if you get stuck on that during the drafting process, you just will never get to the end. That's one of the reasons that I can draft so quickly is those little details. I'll just put in what works in that moment and put brackets around it, like revisit this later and make it correct, and then just move on with the scene, because otherwise you'll interrupt your flow kind of intensely. So my ideal would be to have a month to let the manuscript marinate in my subconscious and, kind of solve those story problems that are still plaguing me in my subconscious where I'm not actively thinking about it necessarily. But when I go revisit that manuscript, suddenly I have all these new ideas for how to, fix something that stumped me when I was drafting, or I'll have a new little bit of something that kind of gives a spark to that scene or that subplot or whatever. So that would be my ideal. And I don't spend a ton of time trying to line edit myself because it's an exercise in futility, really. I mean, I need somebody else to, there's certain kind of tics in my writing that I know I have, and I've identified those, years ago.
Get the off.
Yeah, exactly.
Pray for them.
So I can go back and edit those out, but I really need an outside set of eyes to help me with that. But story stuff, as long as I let it marinate for a while, I can usually address my manuscript with fresh eyes and some fresh creativity. But this time I didn't have a chance to do that. So we'll see what happens. But Steve said he actually, was fine with getting a first draft because first drafts are very malleable. And that's true. It's nothing is set in stone in my mind right now. When I gave him Story Peddler, that had been through peer review. I had worked on it, for years. And not that anything was super cemented with that one either. Well, I shouldn't say that. Certain things were cemented. It was just harder to step outside of that story and think about, totally changing the tense or the point of view for the one in the dark, for example. Or, it just takes a little more to kind of break up the crystals in your brain. Parts of the story start to crystallize, and you have to break that up when an editor says, hey, this isn't working. So he's right.
Well, that's the way it is.
Yes, exactly. That's the way it's always been for 5 years. So he's right. This draft is very malleable. So if he says, I want you to totally cut this point of view, I'm not even going to cry for one day about that. I'd be like, okay, cool, let's do it, because it's this soft little lump of clay right now.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, okay, so where are we?
If I'm right, we're on question 11 now, or maybe?
Yeah.
Okay, this is kind of an odd question. What did you do to market tablespoons?
I think that's teaspoons.
Oh, yeah, that's right. That is teaspoons. You're right.
Tablespoons doesn't be in there.
Oh, PSP, I got it. I was like, what?
Apparently, we've come up with a new nickname for your book, Lindsay.
I love it. I like to bake. It works for me. I'm enjoying this.
Book 3, The Story Baker.
As a marketing tool, you can just have like a little logo on some spoons and just hand it.
I mean, I slapped that Story Peddler logo on a bunch of different random things, and promotional stuff. So why not teaspoons? Hey, I'm down. See, we should tell the listeners. See, I have a list of questions, a base list of questions that that were emailed to me last night, but our lovely hosts have the live document that they are like editing, and so my list of questions
as we go.
So apparently one of the questions says, is asking about marketing TSP, which is the Story Peddler, but it's also the abbreviation for teaspoon. So there we go.
And I couldn't resist.
None of my questions say that. So I was like, what are they talking about? Yeah.
This is the beauty of a live show, Lindsay.
So this was, as I said earlier, this was my first go at really marketing or launching any of my own fiction. So it was a fun and wild and weird process for me. But there were two things that I thought about going into it that I really wanted to, and this is not the right phrasing. It sounds bad when I say it this way, but I wanted to take advantage of what's happening on Instagram right now, which is Bookstagram, if you guys are not familiar. Which I'm sure most of you are. If you're on Instagram and you're a writer or a reader, you're probably familiar with the Bookstagram concept. And I just love it. Being a visual person, I love that's what I do. Like in my downtime is I will scroll through, Bookstagram feeds, and because they're just so beautiful. And my own Bookstagram stuff is not particularly beautiful. When I throw stuff up, it tends to be very simple and, minimalistic, because that's how I do. I'll put it on my beautiful dining room table because the wood is lovely, and then throw some fairy lights on it and I'm done. But people really do amazingly gorgeous artistic shots with books in them. And I love that so much. So I really wanted to tap into that a little bit. And my street team was really instrumental in marketing this book. And I absolutely adore my street team. Like when I was so stressed during the month of April and probably crying at some point every day, and I'm not a crier, so I was crying every day about something, one thing or another. Either I was so stressed about the story Raider and thinking it was never going to get finished, never going to come together, or I was panicking about something related to launching Story Peddler. Like I was just a mess. And when I was having those really awful days, I would just hop on Facebook, and I kind of, pulled back a lot from my regular posting, unless it was, sharing something about Story Peddler or this blog tour or whatever. But I kind of pulled back a lot because I just needed to, because I was so panicked. But the one place that I would go consistently was my secret Facebook group for my street team, because they're just such a lovely bunch and they're so fun. And I would say about half the people who signed up when or who were accepted to the team, because I wanted to have a cap of about 40 to make it manageable for me as a first timer. I didn't know what I was doing with my street team. So I was just kind of stumbling along and figuring it out as I went and deciding what worked for me for a street team. So I capped it at 40. And I would say maybe a little bit less than half of those people were people I knew, like my friends who were like on board, like Josh. Josh is on my team. And so about half, maybe a little fewer than that. And then I had more than 20 strangers who had been following me on one of my social media platforms or heard about it through somewhere. Someone retweeted my, call for here, apply for my street team. And so they were just readers who read the blurb and thought it sounded interesting, or had been following me for a while and wanted to jump on board. So I so appreciate their willingness to kind of say, yeah, we're in. We haven't read this book yet, but we are excited to read it. And if we love it, we'll talk about it to our friends and we'll post about it on our social media platforms and whatnot. And so thankfully, it seems like most of them have really loved it. And so what I was hoping to do was create the feel of a fandom, which is hard when the book isn't launched yet, and you have no idea if anybody's even going to be think the little parts of your world building are cool or not, because you really need to have that if you want that real fantasy fandom feel. They have to be sold on the world and the characters and the creatures and the magic and all of those things. And so I had no idea if it was going to work or not, but thankfully it really seems to have. They've been instrumental in helping me get the word out and encouraging me when I was feeling really what have I done? Why am I launching this book? Why did I sign this contract? I should just go hide in a hole for the rest of my life, because I definitely felt like that at least a couple of days leading up to the launch. So the team was key for sure.
Nice. So, did we cover 12 already?
I don't know. I'm totally lost at this point.
Yeah, I kind of am too.
We're completely off script now, so.
My questions are numbered differently, so I can't even help you guys.
I'm not sure if they're numbered differently.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so which fandom or fandoms have influenced the writing of Teaspoon?
Teaspoon.
I mean,
that
totally looks cold now.
And the sequel will be Tablespoon, and then maybe I'll graduate to a quarter of a cup for book 3. Sorry. Oh gosh, that's actually a tough question, because I'm trying to think what has really influenced the Story Peddler. I can tell you what fandoms I love for sure. As we kind of touched on before, I really try to keep out the outside influences if I can. What's been a really interesting part of reading some of my reviews and that sort of thing, which I know you really shouldn't do as an author, but I totally do. I'm not going to lie. I read all my reviews. And I'm really grateful for them. Even the ones that sting at first, you're like, okay, that's fine. Like, it's helping me grow as a human. So it's great, right? But some of my reviews, they'll mention, you know, books or, you know, that I haven't even heard of, let alone read. So that's really fascinating to me. I kind of like should start keeping a list and go back and reading and seeing what they saw that was similar about the two books or these two series or whatever. So I'm not aware of consciously what has influenced this particular series. But fandoms that I love, Harry Potter for sure. And I'm a total Ravenclaw, like House Pride. What can I say? Woohoo! Let's see what else. I love the Star Wars universe. Now we could totally go off on a rabbit trail with that one about, you know, what you guys think of the new.
Let's not.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
That could take an hour or two.
I haven't seen Solo yet, so I
did like Solo. I saw that one.
I haven't seen that one yet. I'm hoping to see it this week.
It's really good.
I thought it was really good.
Yeah. And I'm a little like wary of it, although so many people who are also storytellers who I respect have said that it was really good and they loved it. And so I'm less wary. But when I first heard about it, I was like, what? Because Han is like my favorite character. And he's, you know, my first crush when I was a little girl was Harrison Ford as Han Solo. So I'm like, I don't know about this at all. So we'll see if I like it, but I have
the actor does a good job with it, and they also toss in a lot of references to the EU too.
Oh, good.
That's expanded universe, not European Union.
I still maintain that they should have just pretended that Harrison Ford was 25 still.
Well, the thing is, that would appeal to the small subset of Star Wars fans, and everybody else would be doing, huh? On the other hand, you look at the box office results anyway, and you go, I could have gone with it.
Very true. I'm a fan of Harrison Ford, but you're right, Aaron.
I do think that Donald Glover was a very great choice for Lando Calrissian, and not having seen the movie yet. So,
oh, he did a good job, yeah.
I loved him in The Martian. So
I'm excited. I'm excited to see it. My husband wants to see it, so I'm sure it'll be
really good.
We don't see a lot in the theater, but we do typically see Star Wars movies in the theater. We don't wait for DVD for those guys. So,
yeah. Okay. Since we're totally off the beaten path, I'm going to take the next question. So, what's something that surprised you most about being an author?
Oh gosh. There's so many. There are like daily surprises. I'll tell you what is surprising about my journey right now. And part of this is just because I'm going to be really like real for a second here, you guys.
That's like what we like for this question.
Hopefully my agent isn't like, you know, going, stop talking. But what's been very surprising about this leg of my journey, because I've been in the industry for a while now, and I've worked, you know, on the production and editing side of things, and I've had a lot of things published at this point, and I'm no stranger to critiques and that sort of thing. I was really shocked by my own sensitivity to criticism when it came to The Story Peddler. That was shocking to me, because I thought I had developed rhino skin. Like I don't, you know, bat an eyelash when I get an editorial letter back. I don't, you know, cry when I get critiques. Like that's not who I am at this stage in my writing journey. And so it was very surprising to me that I would be really at all sensitive or not able to let criticism roll off my back as easily as I expected. And so I think what I've learned is that it's less rhino skin, because when you say rhino skin, that sounds like something permanent that you just wear. You know, it's like part of you.
Right.
And that's how I was visualizing it was something that I had developed over years as a professional in this industry. And what I realized is it's more like armor, you know, that you put on and you take off. And so what I was trying to do was I was trying to launch this book and get it out there to blog tour people, reviewers, bookstagrammers. It's up on NetGalley. It's, it's out there like widely. Yep. And it's in over 100 libraries, or I should say over 100 library systems. It's in many more branches than 100. Hundreds, we'll say that instead. So it's definitely out there. This is not just my family and friends and, colleagues reading this anymore. And what I was trying to do was launch this book, for the first time, launch a book out into the wide world like that at the same time that I was trying to draft. And when I draft, I take off all of that armor. I take everything off and set it aside, and I sit down and try to get really vulnerable on the page and tap into emotions that might be really difficult or past experiences that are really difficult. And, without being too spoilery, if you've read The Story Peddler, there's a character and a subplot and a scene in there that it really deals with my history as a medical mom and my son's seizure condition and his, brain tumor and that sort of thing. So, that was kind of a lot of what I was tapping into there in that book. Well, in Story Raider, I'm really going to be dealing with this a lot more in book 3, but I'm touching on my history of childhood sexual abuse in Story Raider. And so these are not lightweight things. And even though my stories overall feel, I hope, and at least according to what readers have said so far, they do feel light and they feel hopeful and they feel fun. And yet at the same time, as an artist, I'm diving into this stuff personally while I'm drafting. So there is still weight to it. And I found that I can't do those things at the same time. I can't try to wear my armor during the day while I'm promoting something and launching something and putting it out there and receiving criticism. And then every night sit down and strip off that armor and try to be vulnerable on the page. I just can't do those things at the same time because it's not a skin that I have developed and that I wear permanently. It's something that I take on and off. And so that was surprising to me because you think after so many years that you know yourself as an artist, as a professional, as a business person, whatever, and then to discover something and realize, oh man, like that's totally not going to work for me moving forward. I need to make sure that I'm promoting with all of my armor on at one time and then drafting at a totally different time where I'm not receiving a lot of criticism from the public because I have to get very vulnerable and raw and not have armor on. Because if I have armor on while I try to write, I'm going to be holding my audience at arm's length, and that's not what I want. I want to let them in and be transparent and raw on the page. So that was a big surprise to me recently, for sure.
Yeah. As our friend Amy Brock McNew would say, guts on the page.
Yes, exactly.
And I've got a dog barking. I got to go figure out why they're barking.
I'm very proud.
They bark all the time.
My cat is being so silent. I've got my little baby kitten. He's not really a baby. He's almost a year now, but he's next to me on my chair and he's been so quiet. I'm so proud of him. He has not tried to step on my keyboard once. It's a miracle.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
See now he's going to step all over.
No,
I know.
Said that, yeah.
He's staring at me too. He's going to.
So we're winding down. We just have a couple more questions. What is one piece of writing advice that you want to share with aspiring authors or unpublished as of yet authors?
I think something that's really important is to, how do I want to phrase this? I'm editing myself right now. Sorry. I want this to be eloquent. It's not going to come out eloquent. That's fine. Okay, I'll just say it. I think it's important to really understand where you are on your journey and embrace the different stages of it, because every stage has its fabulous parts and every stage has its horrible parts. Like it's horrible to be out on submission and to be waiting and waiting and waiting. But there's something that's beautiful about that time too, where you're able to pour into your education as a writer, or to have the freedom to explore new ideas in your downtime and that sort of thing. And when you're under contract, you don't always have that freedom. So there are definitely benefits and difficult parts about every single phase of your journey. And I think something that I tell people who are just like at that stage right before they're ready for publication is that it's very normal and natural in our development as writers and as artists to draw upon our influences very heavily, and to like when I wrote the first complete draft of my first fantasy series, I was writing in what I now call fantasy voice. And it's because I read a lot of, mid-century and older fantasy when I was younger. It was like this weird kind of ethereal, very like almost flowery language. And everything was like sounding mystical and kind of, otherworldly. And yet that series is a portal fantasy. And so my main character is a modern American teenager. And so,
that wouldn't necessarily,
yeah, it didn't work at all. And maybe if you're writing like massive epics, high fantasy, whatever, that might work, that kind of fantasy voice. But for what I was writing and for who I am, that doesn't work for me at all. So what I was doing was pulling very heavily from, my childhood spent reading Oz, and I had just finished Narnia for the first time in those days. And so that kind of mid-century style, mid-century and older, I was emulating that. And that's very normal and natural to do that. But at some point, if you want to not only be published or to publish yourself, I'm a big fan of indie publishing as well. I think if you really want to get readers excited about what you're doing, you have to figure out who you are and find your unique voice, your unique self. So it's great to have all of these wonderful influences, and we definitely want those to seep into our souls as artists, but you don't want to be emulating or copying anybody. You want to discover what's unique about you. What does your life experience, where has it led you to this moment where there's something about the world that only you can say in the way that you say it, if that makes sense. So while there's nothing new under the sun, in one respect, I think that there's nobody who's ever lived your life before, and there's nobody who looks at the world exactly the same way you do. So I think everybody really does have something a little bit unique to bring to their writing. And so I always encourage people who have been, spending the years working on their craft and all those very technical aspects. I think one of those last things that we add back in, one of those last layers that really make us ready to be out there is discovering that unique voice and what you have to say that isn't like what J.K. Rowling has to say, or what L. Frank Baum has to say, or Lewis or anybody else. There's something you have to say in a specific way that only you can say it.
Yep.
Agreed.
Mm-hmm.
Totally true.
So. And to round things out here, is where can our listeners go to learn more about you and or your work?
Oh, well, that's an easy one. I like this easy question. I'm, of course, kind of all over the internet in various places. My favorite social media platform is actually Instagram. And you can find me there. I'm at LINZYA Franklin. But my home base is, of course, my website. And you can find out, I've got book pages on there where they've got direct links to a bunch of different retailers where you can find my books and that sort of thing. You can also find all of my various social media outlets there. And that is LindsayFranklin.com. So that's my whole name spelled out correctly. On Twitter and Instagram, I've got the Z in there because my whole name spelled out is too long for Twitter. So that's why I've got the Z in there. That is not the way my name's actually spelled. So website is LINDSAYA Franklin.com. Nice.
Well, thanks so much for coming on and hanging out with us. We really enjoyed having you.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. Thank you guys so much for having me.
It was great to have you. Thanks.
Yay.